Welcome, everyone. My name is Matthew Jones, and I'm the Adult Services Coordinator at Sandwich Public Library here in Sandwich, Illinois. Thank you so much for joining us online tonight for this webinar. So excited to learn together, and I appreciate you taking the time to come and join us. So I just want to start by saying welcome. You should see at the bottom of your screen a chat box. You can feel free to say hello to us there. If you want to tell us where you're viewing from, that'd be fine. We already said hello to Kristen, so she found the chat box just fine. You also should see a Q&A box. You can feel free to use either the chat box or the Q&A box to leave us your questions. At the end of our session tonight, I will moderate Q&A, the questions that you have for our presenter, and so feel free to use that chat box or that Q&A box and leave your questions, and we'll do our best to get to as many of those as we can. Hello, everyone. I see you all posting there. That's fantastic. Before we begin, I just want to let you know of another webinar that we have coming up at the end of the month. On Tuesday, November 24th, we'll be hosting a webinar called Cultivating Mental Health During a Pandemic. We will have a guest speaker from the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and she will be speaking with us about how to take care of ourselves well, and she'll be also sharing a lot of great resources for mental health, especially as we head into winter and holidays. And so you won't want to miss that. It'll be a great resource, and we'll look forward to hopefully seeing you there as well on the 24th, and that will be at 6:30 p.m. Of course, you can find that information, and you'll be able to find the recording of tonight's session on our website. That's www.sandwichpld.org, and you can find all of that there on our website. With all that being said, I want to welcome Molly to the Sandwich Public Library tonight and thank her for her time. And I know we're going to hear from her, and it's going to be great information and also a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to this myself. I told her before we began that this is a webinar that I would be watching even if I didn't work here. So I'm very excited about what we're going to learn tonight. And again, if you have questions for Molly along the way, feel free to drop those in the chat box or the Q&A box, and we'll take care to work our way through those at the end. Molly, thanks for being here. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so you can see my presentation. Okay. Cool. So as Matt said, my name is Molly Fraser, and today we'll be talking about cooking sustainably. So first I'll just tell you guys a little bit about me. I graduated from North Central College in 2019 with my degree in environmental studies and media studies. And now I'm using that degree to run the food and sustainability blog, Sustained Kitchen. So over on Sustained Kitchen, I post one seasonal recipe every week. So those recipes come out on Sundays. And then every week on Wednesdays, I post a sustainability article. So my sustainability articles have a really wide range. So I'll post things like tips for reducing waste in your kitchen, pros and cons of farmers markets, things about different social justice issues. So if you're interested in checking out any of that content, you can check out my blog over at www.sustained.kitchen. And then if you want to see my food photography, you can go over to my Instagram. So on the right-hand side there, I have a little preview of my pictures. And my handle is at sustained.kitchen. So first, let's just kind of define what sustainability is. So my favorite definition of sustainability, and probably the most popular definition of sustainability, comes from the UN Commission on Environment and Development. So they say that sustainability is meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So basically, sustainability is just about taking enough from the planet so that we can live a high quality of life. But in doing that, we have to make sure that we don't take too much or damage too much, because that might sacrifice the ability of, our children or our children's children to live that same quality of life. So another way to think about sustainability is the triple bottom line. So this approach is used mostly in business and, sustainable business, but it can apply to everyday people as well. So this approach basically just emphasizes that sustainability has 3 pillars. So the first pillar is planet, and that's what people generally tend to think of when they think of sustainability. This includes things like curbing pollution or controlling invasive species, protecting biodiversity, things like that. And then the second pillar is about people. So this just kind of emphasizes the need to care for our communities, because if certain groups of people are being exploited or oppressed or whatever the case may be, that's not something that we want to sustain into the future, right? So that's not a sustainable way of living. So some practical things in that pillar would be like volunteering, learning about different cultures, being active in politics. So that is a part of sustainability as well. And then again, this is a tool for businesses. So of course that profit piece has to be in there, because without profit, their business will fail. So I like the triple bottom line just because it's an easy way to conceptualize that sustainability is about more than just sustaining the planet, right? It's very much about people as well and caring for our communities. So now I want to talk about just a few of the current issues in food sustainability. So obviously these are not all of the issues in food sustainability. These are just the ones that are most relevant to this presentation. So let's start with pesticide and fertilizer pollution. Industrial agriculture relies really heavily on pesticides to kill bugs, to kill weeds, to fight off, diseases and fungi. And they also rely on fertilizers to bring nutrients into the soil, because when you plant crops, they take nutrients from the soil. So you need to really give back to the soil by using fertilizers. So one major problem with fertilizers and pesticides is that they tend to be really disruptive to ecosystems. A lot of times pesticides in particular will end up killing good bugs along with, the bad bugs that they're intended to kill. Or even if they don't kill certain animals, they might harm them. So that is a concern with pesticides. And then fertilizers, another concern with them is that if you add too much of a certain nutrient to the soil, it can cause problems. So in the news a lot of times you'll see things about like algae blooms, and that's what happens when you add too much nitrogen into the soil. And a lot of fertilizers these days are made with nitrogen. So that nitrogen can actually run off into our waterways and cause algae just to kind of like grow like crazy. And that can be really damaging to those habitats and those aquatic ecosystems. And then of course, pesticides and fertilizers are also dangerous to humans. So a lot of farm work and a lot of farm chemicals are actually applied by hand. So there are people who are exposed to pesticides and fertilizers at a much higher rate than we would get when we were just eating the food. And that high rate of exposure is actually linked to things like cancer and birth defects and lung problems and other health problems. So pesticides and fertilizers are really a social issue as well. So if you want more information about that, you can check out the NRDC. They have a website called Industrial Agricultural Pollution 101 that has a lot of great information about that. And now moving on to ecosystem degradation. So a lot of industrial agricultural fields are what we call monocultures. So basically a monoculture is just when you have one crop that's planted over acres and acres of land. So like a lot of the cornfields that you see in Sandwich, those are all monocultures. And the problem with monocultures is that they tend to decrease biodiversity. And when you have less biodiversity in an ecosystem, your crops are less resilient to pests and diseases because they can just, spread from one plant to the next without any kind of barrier in between them. So that's why if you have a personal garden, it might not have a lot of pest problems because the plants that you have planted there Some of them will attract certain pests that others will deter. So it kind of creates a balance there. But when you have a monoculture, that is not the case. And then the lack of biodiversity in these monoculture fields is also bad for soils, because if you don't have plants that are giving and taking different nutrients from the soil, if they're all, sucking the same nutrient from the soil, then that's not going to be good for soil health. And then deforestation, as you can see in that picture, that's also a big issue internationally. A lot of times you'll see stories in the news about, the Amazon rainforest. There's a lot of deforestation going on there to make way for pasture land or for, coffee fields, which are monocultures a lot of times, and stuff like that. So yeah, that is a huge issue. And if you want to know more about that, the WWF has a really great article called Soil Erosion and Degradation that just kind of goes over the basics of that issue. And then moving on to food justice and human rights. So food justice is just the concept that everyone should have access to nutritious, affordable, and plentiful food. So one example of food injustice in the United States right now would be the prevalence of food deserts. So a food desert is basically just a neighborhood that doesn't have easy access to fresh produce. So the people in that neighborhood might have to drive like 15 miles or more to get to a store that sells fresh produce. And a lot of times these are low income neighborhoods where grocery stores don't want to build. So that is really unfair to the people who live there, because then they just don't have access to that fresh produce. And then human rights violations are also a big issue in agriculture, especially internationally. Some countries still rely on child labor for a lot of their farm work. A lot of farmers internationally don't make a living wage. And here in the US, most of our migrant workers are immigrants, and they are expected to work for extremely low wages, even though their work is really difficult and really dangerous. So in that photo there, you can see migrant workers in California, and they were actually working when those wildfires were kind of going crazy. And officials had warned everyone to stay indoors, but the migrant workers had to keep working anyway, even as the air was filled with smoke. So in that San Francisco Chronicle article that I have listed there, they actually said that these workers were not offered proper face coverings as they were working. So not only were they working outside in the smoke, but they also didn't have proper masks to protect them. So issues like that exist all over the world and all over the US. And then, of course, climate change. So climate change is basically just the greenhouse gas effect that's happening at the scale of our planet. So those gases that I have listed there, methane, water vapor, nitrous oxide, and carbon dioxide, those are called greenhouse gases. And when those are released into our atmosphere, they actually trap infrared radiation from the sun, and then they radiate those rays back out in the form of heat. So that heats up our atmosphere. And it turns out that a lot of the activities that we do on a daily basis release these gases. So every time you use electricity, if it doesn't come from solar or wind or some other renewable source, it's most likely releasing carbon dioxide. Whenever you drive a car, you're releasing carbon dioxide. And agriculture also uses a lot of carbon dioxide when they produce fertilizers and pesticides, when they, process grains, things like that. All of these things require a lot of energy. And then methane is also a really big one that we'll talk about in a minute. So animal agriculture releases a lot of methane just because, living creatures release methane as we digest food and as we live. So those are all, pretty bad greenhouse gases. And if you want to know more information about that, NASA has some really great charts, a lot of statistics about climate change and global warming over on their website. So now moving on to waste. So there are kind of a few different components of waste. So first, we live in a very consumer-driven society. So most people are focused on just kind of getting more and more stuff. And then once they decide that they're done with that stuff, they throw it in the trash. But the problem with that is that stuff never really goes away, right? It's either sent to a landfill where eventually it will probably, leach harmful chemicals into our soil, or a lot of our trash is actually sent to other countries. And then it's just their problem to deal with. So stuff never goes away, right? And in the US especially, we really need to be focused on acquiring less stuff. So if you want to know more about that, The Story of Stuff by Annie Leonard is a really great book. It's really great for beginners too, if you're just getting into sustainability. And then there's the issue of plastic waste. So plastic as a material can be really damaging to human health and to our environments. And that's because plastic doesn't fully biodegrade. It just breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces of plastic. And these are actually called microplastics. And researchers have found these microplastics in our sea, in our seafood, in our land, in our air. And unfortunately, these can be really harmful to human health. Some studies have shown that they can alter hormones. They've also been linked to problems with reproduction and development. So we definitely want to be limiting our plastic waste as much as we possibly can. And then food waste is another huge component of waste. So in the United States right now, we actually waste up to 30 to 40% of our food. And that fact comes from the USDA. So when we waste all of that food, all of the energy and all of the inputs that went into making that food are also wasted. And as you can see in this nice little infographic, when food waste is buried in a landfill, it also produces methane, which is one of those greenhouse gases that I talked about a second ago. And methane is actually a very powerful and dangerous greenhouse gas. So it's 21 times, it has a 21 times greater warming potential than carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide is what is kind of the main greenhouse gas, right? And methane is actually a lot more dangerous than that. So now I've told you about all of those problems. So let's talk about what we can do to help. So one thing that you can do is to educate yourself, because the more that you know about sustainability issues, the more informed choices you'll be able to make to live more sustainably. And then being politically active. So obviously today is election day, but politics don't end after election day, right? In our society, we're really lucky that we have the chance to be politically active every single day. You can call your representative whenever you want to. And I actually suggest regularly calling or writing to your representatives and telling them that you're passionate about sustainability or about, regenerative agriculture or, whatever issue you're interested in. And it doesn't matter what party you are or what party your representative is. Sustainability is really something that everyone can get on board with. And as an example of that, right now in the US Senate, there's this thing called the Climate Solutions Caucus. And that's basically just a group of representatives who are working to create more sustainable policies. And right now, that group has an equal number of Democrats and Republicans. So this is an issue that everybody can get involved with and everybody can be passionate about. And then it's also really important to be politically active because it's not like most of these sustainability issues are caused by individual people. Most of these big issues are caused by big corporations and industries that have gotten into the habit of operating in certain ways. And now it turns out that those habits are really hurting people and they're really hurting our planet. So the way that we can hold those companies and industries accountable is through making new policies. So being politically active is incredibly important. And then obviously you can cook sustainably. So now let's get into 5 ways to buy food sustainably. So the first thing that you can do is to garden or buy local food. So like I mentioned earlier, greenhouse gases are a big issue in our world and they are causing climate change. So gardening in particular reduces the greenhouse gases associated with your food because you don't have to drive anywhere to get your food. You can just walk into your backyard and grab it. And then it's also really nice to garden because you can eliminate pesticides and fertilizers entirely most of the time. So you don't have that pollution either. And then as far as buying locally goes, I like to shop locally mostly because I feel like it's more socially sustainable. So like we were talking about with the triple bottom line, it just kind of helps create that sense of community that we talked about. And as far as environmentally goes, there are some mixed studies about whether buying locally is actually more, environmentally friendly. Some studies show that local food has a lower carbon footprint, and some show that it doesn't. And that basically just has to do with the efficiency of, one truck getting a big load of produce from one farm and bringing it to one location, as opposed to a bunch of smaller farmers driving to one location. So in terms of the environmental benefits, it's a bit of a toss-up, but buying locally is definitely socially sustainable, I believe. So that is one great way to buy food sustainably. So practically, how can you do this? Obviously, if you have a backyard, you can plant a garden there. But even if you don't have a backyard, you can have a container garden. So those cute little strawberries there were actually grown in my container garden on my patio. So yeah, there are a lot of things that you can do even if you don't have a backyard. And then as far as local food goes, there are a lot of great farmers markets around Sandwich. So I believe that Yorkville had like a small little farmers market this season. Oswego has a really great one. DeKalb has a really good farmers market. Aurora and Naperville as well all have really good ones. And then there are also CSAs. So CSA stands for Community Supported Agriculture, and basically that's just a box of produce that farms can send to people. So you pay the farm, and then weekly they will send you a share of their produce. So that's another really great way to get local food.
Molly, I think we're missing the very bottom of the screen.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, so I don't think we saw your last, I think we got everything you're saying, but we're not seeing below farmers markets. I don't know if. Hey, there we go.
Is that better?
Yeah, there. That's it.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so the second thing that you can do is buy only what you'll eat. So like I mentioned earlier, about 1/3 of our food goes to waste in the United States. So when we waste that food, we waste all of those inputs as well, and that also contributes to climate change. So one thing that you can do to prevent food waste is to meal plan and meal prep. So it's not like you have to plan out every single meal that you're going to eat for the week, but it really helps if you go to the grocery store with at least a rough idea in mind of what meals you're going to make so that you don't end up with a bunch of random things that don't go together. And then also, meal prepping is really important as well. So if you prep all of your meals ahead of time, then you'll be able to see what ingredients you have left and what you can make out of them before they go bad. So I really suggest prepping your meals as soon as you can after you buy your produce, so that you're able to use all of your food. So then the third thing that you can do is buy fewer packaged foods. So like I said earlier, plastic waste is really nasty and we want to be eliminating it as much as we possibly can. So one way that you can reduce your plastic waste is to buy more fruits and vegetables, because most grocery stores don't package their fruits and vegetables because they already have, a natural packaging in their skin. So spend most of your time at the grocery store in the fruit and vegetable section. That will really help you, cut back on those packaged foods. And then another thing that you can do is shop at the bulk bins. So bulk bins are basically just self-serve bins that a lot of grocery stores have, and you can use your own containers to kind of scoop out however much of that product you want. So this is usually used for things like nuts and seeds and grains. Unfortunately, a lot of bulk bins are closed right now due to the pandemic, but hopefully those will open up again soon so we can start using our own containers again. And then the fourth thing that you can do to buy food sustainably is to look for sustainable certifications. So these that I have here are 4 of my favorite sustainable certifications to look for on food. So that B Corporation label. There's this thing called the B Lab, and they basically inspect companies and then they give them a score based on how socially and environmentally sustainable they are. And if the company's score is high enough, then they can become a certified B Corporation. And on the B Lab website, you can actually look through all of the companies that are B Corps, and you can even see what their scores are and what they scored higher or lower in. So that is a really great program to find sustainable companies. And then the bird-friendly label. So this is a label for coffee, and it was created by the Smithsonian. And it basically just denotes coffee that was grown in a polyculture landscape. So polyculture is the opposite of those monocultures that we talked about earlier, right? So these are going to be environments that have a lot of biodiversity and have a lot of room for songbird habitats. So that's a really nice logo to look for in coffee. And then you're all probably familiar, a little bit at least, with the organic label. So the organic label just means that when that produce was grown, the farmers did not use synthetic pesticides or fertilizers. So organic produce still can be grown with pesticides and fertilizers, they just have to be non-synthetic. And a lot of times those non-synthetic pesticides and fertilizers are less damaging to environments and they're less dangerous for humans. So that's why I really like that label. And then fair trade is our last label here. So fair trade basically is just the concept that farmers and farm workers should be earning a fair wage for their crops. Some studies show that the fair trade symbol doesn't make a big difference in building sustainable economies, but others say that it do. Others say that it does. So if you see a fair trade label, I would suggest just kind of researching that product a little bit more to see what other sustainability initiatives the company might be doing before you completely fall in love with a product just based on the fair trade logo. So all of these logos are really great starting points to finding more sustainable food products. And then the fifth thing that you can do to buy food sustainably is to buy fewer animal products. So like I mentioned earlier, animals release methane and they are major contributors to climate change. So I actually have a study here from Oxford University, and they found that global animal agriculture accounts for 56 to 58% of greenhouse gas emissions from food, but only contributes 37% of our protein intake and 18% of our calorie intake. So basically, animal agriculture is emitting way more than their fair share of greenhouse gases. And then animal agriculture also is very damaging to ecosystems. So cattle especially have a tendency to really trample down topsoils, and that can lead to things like soil erosion, and it can kind of kill all the plants in that area. So animal agriculture and cattle especially are really bad for ecosystems. So when you're looking to replace animal products in your diet, I suggest things like legumes because those are quite high in protein and they have a lot of fiber in them as well. And then if you're looking for sources of iron, leafy greens are really great for that. And then you have your more traditional kind of like vegan meat replacements, tofu, seitan, tempeh, all of those are going to be really high in protein. So now that we've talked about buying food sustainably, let's talk about cooking and baking sustainably. So the first thing that you can do to cook or bake sustainably is to use your food scraps or compost your food scraps. So we've talked a million times in this presentation about food waste and how it releases methane and it wastes all of those agricultural inputs. So this is definitely something that you want to be doing. So one way that I like to use my scraps is to make vegetable broth. So this is really great for vegetables like carrots, celery, onions. You can also use things like garlic, cheese rinds, herbs. And basically whenever you have scraps from those types of food, you can put them in, like I just keep like a gallon bag in my freezer. You can put them into that gallon bag in your freezer. And then once the gallon bag is full, you can just boil them on the stove for a few hours. And then you're left with a really delicious and really healthy vegetable broth. There's a little fly buzzing around me. And then the other thing that you can do is start a compost bin. So if you have a backyard, it's very easy to start a compost. A lot of like tumbling composters are pretty inexpensive, and they're also really easy to use. And then if you don't have a backyard, you can look into something like vermicompost, which is basically just like worm bins. And there are a lot of really great products now that don't, make your house smell, and they're not ugly, and the worms are hidden. So that is another great option if you're looking to start a composter. So then the second way to cook or bake sustainably is to invest in high quality kitchenware. So if you're constantly buying just like really cheap pots and pans and utensils, these products just aren't going to last, right? And we've been talking a lot in this presentation about reducing waste and reducing consumerism, because when you waste products, all of that labor and energy and materials that went into those products are also wasted. And those products also just become pollution. So a few ways that you can find high quality kitchenware. I like to buy a lot of my stuff secondhand because it is cheaper. You can find a lot of really high quality kitchenware at estate sales, at thrift stores, places like that. So you don't have to be spending a ton of money to get high quality kitchenware. There are cheaper options available. But if you do have money, you could spend more upfront, and you'll probably end up saving money in the long run anyway, because if you spend, $50 on a pan that will last you 20 years, that's a lot better than having to buy a new pan every 6 months or so that costs $10. So yeah, spending more upfront is worth it a lot of times. And then the third thing that you can do is save water and energy. So obviously, if you're saving energy, you are reducing your greenhouse gas emissions, because again, those are connected to climate change in that way. And then you can also conserve water. So a lot of places in our world are currently running out of water. We're really lucky to live next to Lake Michigan, which a lot of times seems like an infinite water source, but it is not infinite, and it will run out someday if we keep using it at the rate that we are. So we really want to make sure that we are conserving water and energy. So here are a few ways that you can do this. I suggest using the smallest appliance that you can whenever possible. So if you're reheating leftovers, I suggest that you use the microwave instead of firing up the entire oven. Or you could, microwave it for the first bit of cooking and then put it in the oven just to kind of finish it off and get that crisp finish. Or another thing that you could do is boil water in a kettle instead of boiling it on the stovetop. Because whenever you're using a smaller appliance, that's going to be associated with less energy use. So definitely be turning to those small appliances whenever you can. And then the other thing that you can do is unplug your kitchen devices when they're not in use. So there's this thing called phantom energy, and basically that's just the concept that even if you're not using an appliance, if it's plugged in, it will be taking energy. So definitely be unplugging your devices whenever you can to avoid that phantom energy. And then if you are in the market for new appliances, you can look for energy efficient or water efficient appliances. So those two labels I have there are certifications that were created by the EPA. So the WaterSense label denotes products that use water efficiently. So this is on things like faucets or toilets. I think it's on dishwashers as well. So if you are looking for new appliances, definitely be looking for that WaterSense logo. And then Energy Star is for appliances like fridges, ovens. I think some dishwashers might have Energy Star as well. So definitely be looking for that logo to find the most efficient appliances. And then the fourth thing that you can do is to store food in reusable containers. So we've already talked a million times about how bad plastic is. So you definitely want to be using reusable containers that don't contain plastic. So when you're looking at reusable containers, I suggest sticking to materials like aluminum, glass, or anything compostable. So these three options that I have here, beeswrap, Pyrex style glass containers, and then kind of like aluminum style containers, those are normally your best options. So if you don't know what beeswrap is, it's basically just parchment paper that's coated in beeswax. And it behaves kind of similarly to like cling wrap or aluminum foil. But you can also use it as a plastic bag replacement. You can, wrap your sandwiches in it or whatever. So in my kitchen, I have a lot of beeswrap, and then I have a lot of kind of Pyrex style containers. And those, I can use for most of my needs. And then if you're looking for something more specific, you can buy kind of like an aluminum style bento box. So Planet Box is a really great brand for those. And I'm sure there are other brands out there as well, but these are just the ones that I'm most familiar with. So yeah, aluminum is another great material option. And then the fifth thing that you can do is eat or freeze your leftovers. So obviously, food waste is bad because it releases methane if it goes into the garbage, and it also wastes all of those inputs that went into making it. So how can you eat or freeze your leftovers? If you're someone who gets bored with leftovers, I suggest making basic things, towards the beginning of the week. So then as the week goes on, you can kind of reinvent those into other foods. So for example, if you bake a side of sweet potatoes on, a Monday, then on Tuesday, you can turn those sweet potatoes into an omelet or into a taco or something like that. So that's a really great way to reinvent your leftovers. And then you also want to make sure that you're keeping your fridge and your pantry organized. So my biggest tip for this is to keep sight lines in your fridge and in your cabinets. So if you notice in the photo there, they have the tallest things at the back of the fridge, and then the shorter things are in front. So you can actually see every single thing that's in that fridge. And that's a really good habit to have, because if you just kind of shove your, short little leftovers at the back of the fridge, then you'll be more likely to forget they exist, and they'll be more likely to go to waste. So definitely always try to keep sight lines in your fridge and in your cabinets, so you always know all of the food that you have on hand. Okay, so now getting into the fun stuff. My favorite recipes. So all of these are recipes that are on my blog if you want more specific instructions to them. So the first one that we have is my tomato and cucumber salad. So this is a really great one for summer because that's when cucumbers and tomatoes are in season. So you'll be able to get them, locally, and they'll taste better if you buy them in season. So for this recipe, it's super easy. You just dice up the cucumbers, dice the tomatoes, and then toss it together with some lemon juice, olive oil, herbs, scallions, salt, and pepper. And if you want a little variation on this recipe, a lot of times I'll add roasted chickpeas to it. So that just kind of turns it into more of like a meal rather than a side. So that is a really fun and easy recipe. And then the second recipe here is my vegetarian pumpkin chili. So this is a really great one for fall because that is pumpkin season, obviously. So this one is also really easy. You just dice up some garlic, onion, celery, and carrots, and you saute those with some spices. And then once those have sauteed a little bit, you'll add in some diced onions. They can be fresh onions or you can use canned onions. And then you'll also throw in some black beans, pinto beans, kidney beans, along with some vegetable broth and pumpkin puree. So I know that we are entering kind of a pumpkin shortage right now. It's that time of year when, all the pumpkin seems to be off the shelves. So you can actually make your own pumpkin puree for this recipe. Just buy one of those like pie pumpkins, a lot of times they're called, or baking pumpkins. And then if you roast that in the oven for a while, then you can just scrape out the flesh and blend it in the blender, and you'll have a nice pumpkin puree. And again, if you want more specific instructions for any of this, those are on my blog. So then our third recipe here is my delicata squash, raspberry, and goat cheese salad. So if you're not familiar with delicata squash, it tastes kind of similar to a butternut squash, but the skin is a lot thinner, so you don't have to peel it. So that's always my least favorite part of using butternut squash. So I really love delicata squash because they are really easy to work with. So you just slice up your squash, roast it in the oven, and you'll roast that for about an hour at 400. And then you toss it together with some minced leek, some pepitas, goat cheese, mixed greens. And then for the dressing, you'll blend up half a cup of fresh raspberries. You could probably use frozen in this recipe as well, if you let them thaw a little bit before you do this. So blend up the raspberries, a little bit of that minced leek, along with olive oil and white wine vinegar. And then you just toss all of this together and you have a really delicious salad. And then we have zucchini potato cheese. So this recipe is actually based on my mom's zucchini and potato casserole. But in our house growing up, we just always called it zucchini potato cheese, just because it's kind of fun to say that way. So for this recipe, it's really great for summer. I don't know if I said that already, because that's when zucchini and potatoes are in season. So you'll just thinly slice your waxy potatoes and zucchini, and then you'll saute those potatoes a little bit, just to give them a little bit of a head start on cooking. And then you layer your sauteed potatoes with the zucchinis and some sharp cheddar cheese, and then you throw that all in the oven for 30 to 45 minutes at 425. And when it's done cooking, the top should be nice and crispy. So that's a really great side dish. And in that photo there, I have it topped with some just kind of minced chives. So then we have vegan plum scones. So this scone recipe actually uses kind of a unique ingredient, aquafaba. You can see it there in that third step. So aquafaba is actually the liquid from a can of chickpeas, and it behaves kind of similarly to egg whites. So a lot of times you'll see it as an egg white replacement in vegan baking, because it does have that binding power, and it also whips up really nice and becomes really fluffy when you whip it. So for this recipe, you're just going to whisk together all of your dry ingredients, and then use your fingertips to kind of rub in some coconut oil. So that's kind of a similar method to what you would do with like a pie dough, when you rub in the butter with your fingertips. And then after that, you'll fold in the rest of your wet ingredients, and then form that dough into a disc, cut it into triangles, and bake for 22 to 27 minutes at 400. So I used plums in this recipe, but you could really use whatever fruit you wanted. Any type of berry would work really nice. Nectarines, peaches. You could probably try apples in this recipe, even though I've never tried that, but go ahead and experiment. That's what it's all about. And then our last recipe that we have here is dark chocolate candied blood oranges. So these are another really easy one. You just boil up 4 cups of water with 2 cups of maple syrup, and then you'll put sliced blood oranges in that and let them boil until they're kind of like translucent almost. And then you'll set those on a wire cooling rack to let them dry out. And then after 24 hours, they should be pretty much dry with just like a little bit of tackiness left to them. And at that point, you'll dip them in melted dark chocolate. And I went ahead and sprinkled mine with some flaky sea salt. But you could sprinkle it with, sprinkles or chocolate chips or whatever you wanted to. So, questions?
Wow, thank you so much, Molly. That was awesome. You blew my mind a few times, so that was well worth it. Yeah, we do have some questions here, so let me share what we've got. The first question is, can you put the papery skin of onions and garlic into the broth, or just the end pieces that have some of the actual edible part on it?
You can put the skins in there. I don't think it'll really add much flavor, but I don't think it'll hurt it. You might want to double check on that, because sometimes things like that might add like a weird bitter flavor or something. But I don't think that's the case with onion skins.
Okay, great. A couple other questions here. What are your suggestions for someone just starting out on their sustainable cooking journey for a few quality pieces to invest in? I think it's when you were talking about small appliances and stuff like that.
Okay, I would definitely suggest getting a kettle, because that's a really useful thing to have. Other appliances. A toaster oven can be helpful sometimes. Those can get a little pricey. at some places, but yeah, that can be useful for times when, you don't want to fire up your whole oven. A toaster oven can come in handy. Yeah, those are probably the two big ones that I would suggest.
Great. Good. Next question. Should I be saving the liquid from my chickpeas? Can I just refrigerate it in a mason jar?
Yes, yeah. So I refrigerate that in a mason jar. I've used it after up to like a week and a half. I'm not sure how much longer after that it'll stay good, but yes, yeah, you can definitely refrigerate it for a few days.
That's awesome. And see, Diana commented that she has used her onion and garlic skins and that it works just fine. So
Okay, awesome. Thanks,
that.
Diana.
That's awesome. A couple other questions. One of the things you were talking about was reducing plastic waste and reducing the food that comes in packaging. So I was wondering if you would share maybe one of the hardest things you've given up, something that you really would like to have, but you choose not to because it comes in plastic or packaging.
Sometimes like stores will have packages of like pre-cut produce. So those are tempting to buy sometimes because, a lot of times chopping is the thing that takes the longest when you're making recipes. So yeah, it's hard to resist those sometimes, especially when you're trying to save time. But yeah.
Oh, good. You mentioned legumes. Could you give us some examples? Maybe if not everyone is, all up to snuff on their
Yeah.
legumes.
Yeah, so legumes include all kinds of beans. So like, peas, lentils, I believe are legumes. All types of, pinto beans, kidney beans, black beans, as well as peanuts. Peanuts are also legumes. So peanut butter is a really great source of vegetarian protein.
Great. Awesome. Oh, also another broth question. You said you use your cheese rinds. I've never heard of using cheese rinds in the vegetable broth. So I just wonder if you could say more how it changes the flavor or anything.
Yeah, so I really like using Parmesan rinds specifically because it adds like a saltiness that you don't get from the vegetables. And you can salt it anyway, even if you don't have something like a cheese rind. But yeah, it really it adds a lot of flavor. And you have that fat in there as well, so it makes it a little more satisfying, I think.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. That
Mm-hmm.
was one of the first things that blew my mind.
Yeah.
You mentioned composting indoors, and you talked a little bit about worms there. Could you say more about what are the options for composting indoors?
Yeah, so you can get a bucket that has like a few different sections. So in the top section is where you put all of your fresh food, like freshly, stuff that you want to compost. And then as that breaks down, it'll go into another chamber that has worms in it. And those worms will be able to kind of like eat away at that and make it break down a little bit faster. And then in the bottom of the container is where all of the like fresh compost will go. So a lot of these containers, you don't ever have to come in contact with the worms even. But yeah, that's just one design. There are a ton of different options out there.
That's awesome. I've not heard of that setup before, but I really like it, and
Yeah.
that's awesome. That's really cool. And I just wanted to say thank you for talking about delicata because I have a delicata squash on my counter that someone gave me, and I was going to peel it, and now I don't have to peel it.
Yay!
So happy to know that.
Nice.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I see a comment here that Maggie does have an indoor composter, and it doesn't have worms, and it works just slower. So that's good to know as well.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, next question. Is bees wrap found in grocery stores?
I'm not sure actually. I got mine online.
Okay.
I think some grocery stores might sell them, like especially the, like higher end grocery stores, like maybe a Whole Foods might have them. But yeah, I bought mine online.
Okay, good. Good. Yeah, I see another comment from Maggie here. She says some big Targets do have bees wrap as well.
There you go.
That's good to know. That's good to know. Another question here. Anything you don't recommend putting in compost, eggshells, meat scraps, so that, and then also what do you think about air fryers? So what not to put in compost, and what do you think of air fryers?
So what not to put in compost? I'd say if you're looking for like a compost that becomes compost really quickly, I would avoid things like corn cobs, or like if you have any like really tough stems, I wouldn't put those in there. But these things will break down eventually. It's just a matter of like how fast you want your compost. And if you want to use your compost for a specific purpose, like if you want to use it as a fertilizer for your plants, which is what most people do with their compost, I would suggest having like a good mix of things. So don't put in like 90% coffee grinds, because then, that's going to be really acidic and that's not really going to be the best for your soil. So make sure that you have a good variety of things.
Good. Awesome. And
what was the second part of that?
Any thoughts on air fryers?
Thoughts on air fryers. I don't personally have one. I don't eat a lot of fried foods, but if you're someone who likes fried foods and you fry foods a lot, then I feel like that could be a good way to save oil, because you don't need to use a lot of oil in that. So yeah, if you'd use it enough, I'd say that would be a good investment.
Yeah, cool. And then another question was about the purchasing online. Is that, so like for the bees wrap and stuff, I assume that is going to be repeated purchases, even though did you say it was reusable?
Yeah, it is reusable. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, does it like ever wear out?
So none of mine has worn out, and I've had some of my pieces for like over 4 years. So what you do is you can just kind of like wash them off with some soap and water in the sink, and then just hang them to dry, and then just reuse them.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, didn't know if there was like things that you don't recommend purchasing online, or just as far as the whole sustainable side of online, having everything shipped to your house, and if you had any thoughts on maybe more broadly online shopping and sustainability. I don't know if you want to say anything.
Yeah. So I personally generally try to avoid shopping online, unless it is something like really specific that I can only get online. Yeah, but if you're just, like buying something that you could easily just go to Target and get, the next time you're buying groceries, then I would suggest just turning it into one trip. No need to, do extra stuff if it's unnecessary.
Oh, awesome. Very good. I think we've covered all of the questions. Some folks saying thank you is very informative, and I want to also express again our gratitude for your time and all of the information that you've shared with us. That is very helpful, and you've put great information and other follow-up resources, so that's fantastic. If somebody wants to follow you, can you remind them how to do that? In case we had a couple people sneak in here after we began. And so share your info with us once more.
Yeah. So on Instagram, my handle is @sustained.kitchen. And then my blog, my URL is www.sustained.kitchen. So yeah, that's where you can find me. And thank you guys so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Oh, so good. So good. Again, this has been recorded, and so we will post this on our YouTube channel for the Sandwich Public Library, as well as our website, and we'll put links to the slides that Molly shared with us, so you'll have access to all those recipes as well as the information. And we'll also put links to her blog and her Instagram, so you can find her on our website if you aren't able to find her anywhere else. So Molly, thank you again so much for your time, for all that you're doing, and it was great to have you with us tonight.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks
Have a great night, everyone.
Yeah, thanks everybody for tuning in, and we hope to see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.